On behalf of the entire team at Newberg Diagnostics, I would like to thank you for joining us today on the discussion about variants, vaccines, and us. I'm sure this session will help you gain a clear understanding about the current ongoing pandemic and the new normal. I would like to welcome Ms. Ramya Kannan, a healthcare expert and a moderator for today's event, to proceed with the discussion. Thank you once again for joining us and have a great day ahead. Over to you, Ramya.
Thank you so much for that, and thanks for the invitation here. It's good to see all of you again, even if virtually. But I thought at the last webinar we resolved that would be the last one for us, and here we are again, discussing pretty much the same thing, though in various forms, in its evolved forms today. Thank you, Dr. Ravi, for being with us. I believe you have to leave also early, so we will start with you. And if you could tell us something about, this whole virus mutation and the current variation that we have, Omicron, and also the effect of vaccines, which is a huge topic today. It's a significant topic that everyone is discussing.
Thank you, Ramya, and thank you, Dr. Saranya, for having me on this panel discussion. It's a pleasure to be back. I'll straight away get into the two parts of the question Ramya asked. First is about variants. If there is one thing we have learned in the last 2 years about this virus is that we do not know enough. It seems to throw surprises for each one of us. After Delta wave, we all thought, okay, that's the end of COVID, and with vaccination, everything will settle down. As you all know, SARS-CoV-2 is a beta coronavirus, and it's an RNA virus. RNA viruses are endowed with the property of mutation. Whenever they replicate, they tend to make mistakes. Having said that, with respect to SARS-CoV-2, it's actually one of the decent, if I can use the word in quotes, decent RNA viruses, because it has a fair amount of proofreading ability. Normally, if you take viruses like HIV and influenza, they lack proofreading ability. What is proofreading ability? When they copy themselves, they make mistakes, and these mistakes accumulate as mutations, which may or may not have an impact on the virus. If the mutations are in key positions of the virus, in this case, like the spike protein, then it can result in an amino acid change. Amino acid changes can again be either significant or not significant, depending on how much they alter the structure. If it is a significant mutation, then it alters the behavior of the virus. And one must remember that mutation is a continuous process, and it's a process of natural selection based on Darwinian principle. The fittest will survive. The first mutation that occurred in the Wuhan virus was in February-March 2020. One important amino acid known as aspartic acid at position 614 of spike protein changed to glycine, and that made a big difference to the virus. It became more infectious. I refer to it personally in my nomenclature as the grandmother mutation. Very soon, that grandmother mutant took over and replaced all circulating Wuhan strains in the world, and by October, it had become the dominant variant. Subsequently, from October onwards, vaccine trials were going on, and people were receiving vaccines in developed nation. So the next mutant that came was B.1.17, as it is called in the pangolin lineage. Very confusing lineage. Difficult to remember for common man. So WHO sometime later stepped in and said, let's simplify things, and started calling these mutants based on Greek alphabets like alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and so on. So the the mutant detected in UK started spreading very fast, and it was called alpha mutant. Incidentally, mutants are classified as variants of concern and variants of interest. A variant of concern, by definition, is a virus that can spread very rapidly and across the globe very fast, number one. Number two, a variant of concern can be one that causes more severe disease. And number three, a variant of concern should have a great impact on existing vaccines. These are the conditions. A variant of interest also spreads, but to a limited geographic region, and it does not have as much as an impact on vaccine efficacy as a variant of concern has. So in November last year, we had alpha variant being emerged. Within a month, we had South Africa reporting a beta variant, Brazil reporting a gamma variant. And by February, India reported the first variant of concern known as Delta. Now, this Delta variant had an advantage of being several-fold higher infectious compared to alpha, beta, and gamma. Between alpha, beta, and gamma, the beta virus was the first one that actually started evading the immune response. So you should remember that in South Africa, there was already a mutant that was evading immune response. So Delta took over. We all know we had a huge wave in India and globally also. It raged and was dominating for 8 to 9 months. Like an idiot, I used to tell people there's going to be no variant that will beat Delta. And lo and behold, I was wrong. On November 26th, WHO declared the last variant of concern, Omicron. Omicron is something like the 14th or 15th Greek alphabet. So if you can ask me what happened between alpha, beta, gamma, delta to Omicron, what are the missing ones? They were all the variants of interest like kappa, lambda, mu, and so on. None of them spread as fast and across wide geographic locations, so they remained as variants of interest. Omicron was declared on November 26th by WHO with so fast because Dr. D'Oliveira, who's one of the leading experts in genome sequencing globally in South Africa, showed in a matter of 2 weeks, Omicron, which was 5% of genomes, became 90% in a matter of 2 weeks. It completely replaced. And if you look at graphs, it became vertical, completely taking over. And then, of course, rest is history. It spread across the globe, and it's causing millions of infections in various countries. At Karnataka, we reported Omicron for the first time on December 1st in 2 patients. And then, of course, it has spread across India. It has caused major outbreaks or major large number of infections in Mumbai, Delhi. Mumbai looks like it is almost over the peak. Delhi is almost there at the peak. Other cities are still peaking. Various modelers have predicted that it will cause a huge wave in India, the third wave, which may peak countrywide somewhere in middle of February and then come down by March. But remember, India is a huge country. Various regions will have 1 to 2 weeks shift on the left or the right. Mumbai will come down by this month end. Delhi also will start declining from next week. Bangalore will peak around the last week of January, and so also other cities. So this is the reason for emergence and spread and evolution of Omicron. Let me also tell you that In terms of vaccine efficacy, which was your second part of the question, Omicron seems to be an immune escape variant. Why do we say that? I always tell in a lighter vein to all my friends, professional or otherwise, the biggest risk of getting Omicron is double vaccination. You may laugh at it. I myself am a standing example of an Omicron patient who recovered 1 week back. And if you look at the data, hard data, even in India, otherwise, globally, Omicron is seen in double vaccinated individuals. That tells two things. A, it is escaping the antibody response or the immune response for existing vaccines, but it does protect against severe disease and death, which is something everybody knows. B, I also feel you should give another explanation. It is that the double vaccinated individuals who are going around and probably not using COVID appropriate behavior, they are the ones traveling, they are the ones everywhere. So the chance of getting infection is more with an immune escape variant. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi. We also seem to have a full house now. So let me just tell everyone that we'll have the speakers first, and kindly keep yourselves on mute and do ask questions in the chat box. They will be forwarded to the speakers. Thank you, Dr. Ravi, and we hope you have your recovery has been smooth since then. Yeah. I was also, there's also a question that's going around, and that's pretty common now because a lot of self-testing kits have, invaded the market. And one wonders about, even though it says 98% to 99% sensitivity, I wonder if they are, what is the role of these home test kits, especially in a country that's peaking or nearly peaking? You're on mute, sir. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Ramya, for that question. Let me tell a little about the self-test. First of all, self-test is a rapid antigen detection test. It is not a PCR. So you can do it. Almost all rapid antigen tests are based on detection of nucleoprotein of the virus. Does it impact Omicron diagnosis? The answer is in two parts. Largely no. But you should remember, Omicron is a virus that has had more than 56 mutations, 36 of them in the spike protein, but there are mutations in the nucleoprotein as well.
Can the host please mute everyone, please? Yes, doctor.
Yeah, so there are mutations in the nucleoprotein as well. Fortunately, these mutations are not really in the region where people have developed antibodies, so it is not impacting to a great degree. But yes, it has a small impact on false negativity in people who are positive. As you very rightly said, antigen tests have a very great role to play when there is a wave, but with the caveat that in symptomatic patients, it gives reliable results. In asymptomatic patients, you all will recall that ICMR algorithm very clearly says you should confirm it with an RT-PCR. Having said that, the last point about antigen testing, Indian Council of Medical Research in a very recent advisory has said that antigen tests should be used for symptomatic patients, and there is no need to test asymptomatic patients or contacts in a situation when there is a huge surge. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. Hi, Dr. Ramsubrahmanyam. Welcome back. And we've just had a very interesting discussion, or rather, Dr. Ravi has been talking to us about Omicron and its variants, and also about efficacy of vaccines at this stage and the home test. Dr. Ravi, will you have to leave now, or should you hang on?
I have time up.
Okay, all right.
I have to leave.
Hello.
Right.
Hello.
Yes, Dr.
Ask
Ram.
Ravi one question, Ramya. Ask Dr. Ravi one question. Dr. Ravi, what you pointed out about this being an immune escape mutant was very interesting because, you know, up till now, people have all been saying, oh, we are double vaccinated, so we are safe. Even if we get the infection, it's going to be a mild one. But here now you're telling us that those people who had the double vaccination, by virtue of their behavior, they are more at risk of getting the infection because they don't follow the safety measures. I think that message should go out very strongly to people because they're all sitting pretty thinking we're double vaccinated. So A, we won't get Omicron. B, even if we get it, we're going to get it very mildly. That was a very interesting observation of yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And let me quote from personal example. I've been quite diligent in my COVID appropriate behavior. I really can't recall myself indulging in anything that is really risky in terms of not wearing a mask or going to crowded events or closed spaces. I was fortunate to escape wave 1 and wave 2. That itself is a testimony that I do follow COVID. But even then I got infected. Maybe I might have let my guard down very briefly because of the high infectious nature of this virus. I got infected. Okay, that's a point I want to make. And I'm not here passing a moral judgment on double vaccinated people. I want to make that very, very clear. There is no judgment here. It is just that the data is absolutely crystal clear that Omicron is seen more often at this point of time in double vaccinated people than in people who have received one dose or have not been vaccinated. Over.
Dr. Ravi, there's a question for you before you leave. Sunita Rao asked, what's your take on annual vaccination shots for COVID, which appears like a routine, becoming a routine henceforth?
Well, it is too early to support a policy of annual vaccination. I'm sure there are other eminent panelists who will answer that, like my dear friend Ram on the screen, Professor Jacob John. They will definitely answer it better. But one thing I must tell you that what I have learned is not to tell anything about this virus because it's continuously teaching us a lesson. I used to think I know a lot of virology. I humbly bow my head down and say, I don't know anything about SARS-CoV-2. I used to joke saying that I'll start a viral astrology company last year. In some of my talks, I used to say, now I've stopped that startup venture because I don't think even stars can foretell what will happen to this virus. So, Sunita, to answer your question, at this point of time, at least the next 6 months, what I see happening, I will tell you, I may be wrong, is that a large part of the globe will get vaccinated. And remember, until everybody is protected, nobody is protected. And I'm talking on behalf of all those African nations and the lower income countries where still vaccine accessibility is an issue. Till we meet that, vaccination will continue. And one of the reasons why vaccination precautionary dose, as it's called, was introduced in India is primarily to protect healthcare workers because they're coming down in large numbers and their workforce will be depleted, and also the elderly because there is evidence to say immunity with 2 shots lasts usually around 9 to, especially elderly with comorbidities. So as an annual vaccination plan, are we going there? Honestly, I don't know the answer. And I'm willing to say I don't know the answer. Your second question was, we are seeing the same cities turning out to be hit by wave after wave. It is a behavioral aspect. Cities are crowded, closed spaces are more, people meet in closed spaces, and cities are therefore highly vulnerable for initiating an epidemic or an outbreak with a variant. And again, I will tell you, you will see the same pattern like Delta in Omicron. Right now, it is in major metros. 3 weeks down the line, it will move to districts and it will move to the periphery. So I think this is a very typical epidemiological pattern fueled by social behavior.
There are also other questions, Dr. Ravi. Anuradha asked, which is the appropriate booster dose that one can get? Anuradha from Indian Express. And what about the pediatric group?
The booster dose, I think I should leave this to Dr. Jacob John and Ram. My only take on that is, in our country, the policy is absolutely clear. No crossover. You take the same homologous vaccine, you took 2 doses. I think there is 2 reasons for it. A, there is no clear-cut scientific evidence between the largely used vaccines that of Covishield and Covaxin, that if you mix them, you'll get a better response. And B, if it is permitted, it will cause a huge logistics problem. 80% have received Covishield, 20% have received Covaxin. And if I received Covishield, which I did, I want to go and insist I want Covaxin. Our Covaxin manufacturing capacity is less. Imagine people crisscrossing, and it will result in delay in vaccinations, arguments, fights. I support the Government of India policy. At this point of time, no need for crossover till generate data comes. I'm told there's a large study in CMC Vellore. Ram may know about it, that they are doing the crossover studies, but I'm not privy to that research.
Yes, there's another story about, another question. If data shows that people who are fully vaccinated are getting more infected, then how will the booster shot or the 3rd dose be effective in curbing the spread?
Okay, let's answer this in a try to answer this in a scientific way. We all know, if you accept for a moment, not that it is correct, that antibodies are one of the markers of protection. We all know from studies across the world, they wane anywhere after 3 to 6 months after vaccination. This is an established fact. And antibodies do have some amount of role in protection. A booster will again boost your antibody response. I'm sure it will boost your cell-mediated response as well, but measuring cell-mediated immune response in a large number of people is impractical, because it's a huge, humongous exercise in terms of effort and experimentation and turnaround time. So largely globally, we go by antibody being a surrogate marker of protection, not an absolute marker of protection. And there are studies from the West which have shown that if you give a booster dose after a certain period of time, definitely after 6 months, it does boost the antibody response. And here what we are looking for is not protection against infection, but certainly protection against severe disease and death. I must tell you that there has been unreasonable expectations in humanity from COVID vaccine. Most of the viral vaccines I know only protect severe disease and death. Why are we asking a COVID vaccine to give sterilizing immunity and prevent infection? That will happen if some of the nasal vaccines that are showing tremendous promise come into the market soon. I'm sure that may give a certain amount of protection, reasonable protection against infection. Until then, we have to live with boosters to prevent morbidity and mortality. Over.
Thank you, Doctor. I think the other question about booster you have answered already. So we could move over to Dr. Ram Subramanian. Hi, welcome again, Doctor. Would you like to give as a brief presentation about what you're seeing in the current wave, because you're in practice every day. And what are the key or significant differences you see in this wave from the last one?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. There are a few subtle differences we are seeing these days. One, a lot of them are anecdotal, but this is based on my clinical practice, so I don't think I can substantiate it with papers yet, because it's just about less than 2 months even since this Omicron started. One, we are finding that apart from the elderly who were affected before, and especially the Delta brought in the lowering of age, people who are younger became sicker. But this way, we are seeing a lot of youngsters who are coming in with high fevers. So it's not Omicron, it's just not something which you present with the cold and a cough and it disappears. These are people who come in with 102, 103 degree fevers, and these are anywhere from the age of 5 or 6, going up 15, 20, 25, all of them presenting with high. And fortunately, the fever settles within 48 hours. Most of them do well. By the 3rd or the 4th day, most of them are significantly better. So this is one thing I'm seeing, that they are more symptomatic, but they respond much faster. Second, a lot of them have severe throat pain, which was not seen before. Even though the typical presentation from the South African, studies show that they present with fever, body pain, and a scratchy throat. I find a lot of them complain of severe pain in the throat, warranting they are having difficulty swallowing. So they ask for antibiotics just to prevent that. So I'm worried that the usage of antibiotics will be more now, because these are people think that you take antibiotics, your throat pain will go. So it's tough convincing them that paracetamol is all they need. Number 3, even the elderly people, they respond very well. So much so that if I'm not sure whether it is Omicron, I tell them wait for about 4 to 5 days. If by the 5th day you're feeling much better, then you can rest assured. But if your fever is persisting or your cough is persisting or worsening, then it may not be COVID. The other point is, even though we are seeing predominantly Omicron right now, since we have started looking at the S gene deletion, I find that almost 20% or maybe a little higher would still be a non-Omicron. They all show S gene. I mean, this again, Dr. Ravi has to tell me what it means, but they do have the S gene in, like I said, about 1/5 still have that. And, so we need to be careful. We cannot dismiss everybody as Omicron. So that is why it is very important we tell them that by the 4th or the 5th day, if they're not getting better, they definitely need to be a little watchful. And lastly, again, as Dr. Ravi mentioned, I have had right now a patient who's almost getting on the ventilator, a 60-year-old lady, vaccinated twice, no history of COVID in the past. Sorry, she had COVID in the past, now coming with Omicron. Clinically, based on the S gene deletion, it looks like Omicron, who's very, very sick. So even though the chances of viral pneumonia is less with Omicron, CT scans still tell us that about 20 to 30% of involvement of the lung happens in a number of cases, but they are milder, they are less symptomatic, they recover better. So it's all good news, but I think we still cannot lower our guard. So this is what I have been seeing.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. And this is probably for both of you. Given that you said about 20% continues to be non-Omicron, so it is, we can rightfully believe that the dominant variant is Omicron at this point of time. So does it make sense to do an S gene test and further genome confirmation that it is Omicron, or should we just go ahead and treat the symptoms?
See, the benefits of doing the S gene deletion test is to decide whether a person will benefit from monoclonal antibodies. Because we know that 20% are still deltas, probably. Getting the S gene deletion will give us an indication whether there is going to be benefit in using the monoclonal antibody cocktail, because it's an expensive intervention. It has to be done within 5 days. So we have a narrow window period. So for that reason, yes, it will definitely be beneficial to know whether we are dealing with Omicron or not.
I just want to add, Ramya, I think Ram has very beautifully articulated related. Just one small piece of information. Ram is right, 20% are S gene dropout, but Omicron itself is evolving. There are sub-lineages of Omicron, BA1, BA2, BA3. Especially BA2 is present in quite a few cities in India, and it's notorious to not lose that, but it's not the question of losing the gene. The currently widely used kit is the Thermo Fisher TaqPath that detects the 6970 amino acid deletion. This deletion has been reversed. So the TaqPath test can say there is no S gene dropout, but if you sequence it, it would still be Omicron. It is in this context that we need assays that apart from S gene dropout should also detect specific mutations of Omicron. And in that context, I happen to be associated with the development of a test that uses both S gene dropout and S gene mutation specific application, which does not miss the so-called stealth variants of Omicron. Over.
Right. Thank you. Welcome, Professor Jacob John. Good to have you here. Good to see you virtually at least. And we have been discussing with Dr. Ravi has been speaking and Dr. Ram Subramaniam on Omicron and the variants and vaccines and the current scenario. There is, Dr. Ravi might be leaving in another 15 minutes, and there is one more question for him, if I may ask that. What's your take on the use of antibody cocktail therapy in Omicron?
I think Ram summarized it very well. Antibody cocktails may not be effective because more than 36 mutations are there in the spike protein, and spike protein antibodies are the ones that are predominantly used in the cocktail. Ram can correct me if I'm wrong. Having said that, so it may not work at all in neutralizing, but certainly they don't cause any harm. But that doesn't mean you should abuse them. I think Ram will be the best person to answer that question.
We do get very often asked, we can afford it, and you say it is reasonably tolerated well. So why not give it? This is a very common question we face. So it's a tough time telling them that even when we know that there is S gene deletion, they still want to use it because they can afford it and they want the best. So, any drug, however low the side effects, does have side effects. We have seen cases of bradycardia happening. When I say bradycardia, significant, slowing of the heart rate, warranting stopping the infusion and sometimes restarting. So it's very important we use everything with caution. The one new antibody cocktail which is available in the US is not yet available in India, Sotrovimab. That is believed to have efficacy against the Omicron status, but that is not yet available in India.
Right. Dr. Jacob John, maybe you would like to tell us, so we have heard so far that this epidemic, this part of the wave has had an impact on children, definitely 5 years and above, or even younger children. What is the, in your experience, in your reading and in your research and analysis, what is the impact that this Omicron has had on younger population and the need for vaccination for them?
First of all, the disease that Omicron causes is, am I audible? Okay. Is quite different from alpha, beta, gamma, delta disease. Let me explain it this way. The pathogenicity depends upon the host virus interactions. And the host virus interactions begin with the host cell virus interactions. Omicron, the beta coronaviruses enter the human cell via ACE2. And when ACE2 is bound by the spike protein, two things happen. The furin dissociation of S1S2, and there is an enzyme that fuses the viral envelope with the cell membrane, TMP-RSS2. I'm not a biochemist. I would know exactly more details. And once this happens, the entire cell membrane is proteolized, and it's made to look more like the viral envelope, and the immediate neighbor cells fuses with this cell. So there are 2 nuclei, 1 cell, then 3 nuclei, 1 cell, 4, 5, 6, 10. So this giant cell is called syncytium. And the syncytium formation is highly correlated with pathogenicity, particularly lung pathogenicity leading to anoxia and so-called pneumonia. All those kind of things are correlated with the syncytium formation. Omicron does not follow this pathway. When the virus particle attaches to the ACE2 receptor, the cell thinks that it's a physiological reaction, but it is not. There's a particulate thing sticking on to the receptor. Then what happens is the normal cell process of endocytosis. It is taken into the cell to destroy. So there is an endosome already within the cytoplasm, which has enzymes to destroy bacteria, stuff like that. And so the endocytotic vesicle and the endosome fuse together. The virus genes are spilled out, but then that's what the virus wants. So in the cytoplasm, now the virus gene becomes active. And because the whole thing is intracellular, there is no giant cell or syncytium formation. And this spares the lung. But at the same time, apparently, I do not know the details, the respiratory surface epithelium, bronchus and throat and nasopharynx, are more receptive to this kind of virus entry than the deep down in the alveoli and lungs. So there is a shift from the lungs to the upper respiratory tract. So that is one shift. And the second shift is no syncytium, so the pathology is different. So the whole disease process has, I would almost think, a fundamental shift in pathogenesis. Now imagine this in children. The risk of children with Delta and the previous variants were a replica of the adult disease, number one, much less in frequency, far less in frequency, but not zero. There are different calculations, but we don't need to go into that. Much less in frequency, that's enough for us. Secondly, children, more than adults, after recovering from the infection, goes into a hyperinflammatory state, the MIS-C syndrome. The C is for children, there is A for adults, but it's far more common with children. So these two are particularly, when we think about children, we have. The third is, although the frequency is low, children who have the MICC is quite related to COVID-19. Plus, there are two things. One, a lot of children suffer from long COVID. And there are, psychological issues and all that, whether that's another problem. And what is not recognized by people is that children develop diabetes. Type 1 or type 2 diabetes, children are prone to, one of the complications of this infection in children is the diabetes. So there are studies that showing that immunity protects against all of this. Okay, so it is a watered down syndrome, less severe, less frequent, but for the affected child, it's bad news.
Right, Doctor. But also, if you could talk about vaccines for children, because the WHO said that in order to open up schools, they said that children have are not prone to the same flooding of the lungs, and therefore are in a better position to handle this particular infection, and so that even if they were not vaccinated, they could go to school. Now we are, there is an urgency in vaccinating children. Which of this, are both true, are both valid, or which one of it is wrong?
There are two ways of looking at it. One is the puritanical view of children and vaccine. The other is supply demand side. And so that will modulate WHO's reading because between a dose for a child versus a dose for a senior citizen, and between well-vaccinated rich countries versus poorly vaccinated poor countries, WHO's voice will be shifted to a little more equity. And WHO cannot do anything about it, but that's their voice. So WHO's recommendations have to be looked at from that angle, that they will have their own reasons for making certain recommendations. And WHO recommendation is not, it's a recommendation. Each country will have to decide its own way of managing it. Now, the question is, do children need vaccination? It depends on how you look at what are you vaccinating children, what is the purpose of vaccinating children. As I said, children have 2-3 problems that I mentioned, and vaccination will protect all of them. And there have been studies showing that the diabetes can be prevented if you MISC can be prevented. There are vaccines protect against all of them, but these are all the pre-Omicron studies against mostly against Delta. The vaccines protect against those. Now, so if Omicron had not appeared on the scene, I would strongly argue that children deserve vaccination provided, and it is my rider, that is, the risk of disease is low in children. The risk of vaccine should be orders of magnitude lower. Okay, that conditionality fixes your safety assessment. So only extremely safe vaccines can be rolled out, particularly in a country like India, where, if there is any problem, the management, treatment, all these kind of are not up to the mark. So pushing a child into some kind of a disease, we have to protect against. At the same time, if the vaccine has any problem, and then who will look after the child? So those kind of issues are there. So to me, safety is absolutely essential for childhood vaccines. Now, in the West, they have more data and they have better studies, and they have shown that in various places, children's admissions have skyrocketed in many places, and deaths are counted in the United States. We have no idea how many children have died and all that. So there, the available vaccine is being used, mRNA vaccine. And mRNA vaccines are highly inflammation-inducing method. And so myocarditis, pericarditis, etc. are so they have to weigh between these two. The inactivated virus vaccine with the Th1 stimulating adjuvant, which is the strength of Covaxin, they have done safety studies in 2 to 18 children in India. And the results are not yet published, but they're in the public domain. You get what they have submitted to the DCGI. The numbers are not very great. 175 2 to 6, 175 6 to 12, and 175 12 to 18. The safety record within this 525 or so children is paka. Absolutely no problems. And I think that will pan out the same way when you expand more number of children. The efficacy, of course, you can only measure virus neutralizing antibody and cell-mediated immunity. On both counts, their measurements are quite good. So it will be highly immunogenic, both Th1, the cell-mediated, and Th2, the antibody-mediated. So we expect that will be highly protective. The other protein antigens, the Covovax and the Corbovax, appearing on this horizon, we would expect them also to be equally safe as the Covaxin. The AstraZeneca vaccine, I have not seen enough data of safety in children. However, the thrombocytopenic blood clotting problems are a worry. So unless that is ensured, it is difficult to recommend anything of that series of vaccine, Johnson & Johnson, etc. So in my mind, the children do deserve vaccination, safe and effective vaccines, and stepping down 18 to 15, 15 to 12, 12 to 6 is not a bad idea if you move fast enough. But if you're going to delay it, then Omicron's is spreading so fast. We don't know exactly what Omicron is doing. We will know it after 2 months or 3 months. But so do we wait for that, or do we use a safe vaccine? These are issues that the policymakers have to think. My bias as a pediatrician and a vaccine promoting a person is that we should move much faster than what we are doing right now. And I think in future, we will probably be giving vaccine to children about 2. Why? Because the virus is going to stay with us. And I don't know whether Ravi agree or not. I doubt if Omicron will displace Delta. It may not. So we may have Delta and Omicron co-circulating. So if a child gets Omicron first, lucky, because then there is protection against Delta. But if the child gets Delta first, unlucky, because Delta has more problems. So I think one way or the other, for the foreseeable near future, we are stuck with vaccination against COVID-19. And the earlier you start in age-wise, and 2 is the earliest we can think of right now, I think that's the way forward.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Jacob John. That was very helpful. And I think that sort of also, if I can hop over to Dr. Ramasubramanian, we're talking about Delta and Omicron co-infections. That's something that, and people are also attaching fancy names to these things, which gets the rest of the world in a flap about whether it's a new form of variant. But are we seeing a number of these kind of co-infections in the hospital or in clinics now? And with the test positivity rates actually galloping, is there something that we can do to prevent, to protect, and to sort of take care of ourselves?
Vaccines are our best bet. As Dr. Ravi said earlier, the sooner we get to vaccinating with 2 doses the entire population, the better chance we stand. And again, reiterating what Dr. Jacob John said, if we are vaccinating only the adults, it may not be enough. We are coming to a stage where we have to extend it to children quite fast and make sure that they are also vaccinated. There's a little time because I think these waves comes in every few months. And we are also looking at probably modification of current vaccines, which may extend to cover, strains like Omicron better. So that's probably for the future. Apart from vaccines, we are still left with, good old masks and social distancing, which make a huge impact in preventing disease. And we have to understand that vaccines only minimize the severity of the disease. They don't have a great impact on transmission. And right now, even though we are flooded, every second person I speak to either has had a day's fever with cough and cold a few days back, or has just recovered, is suffering from one right now. And fortunately, most of them are mild. So I think Omicron has given us a little time to think about how it's going to be in the future. But my only concern is if we get something like Omicron in the future with the same virulence as Delta, I think that's bad news.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Ramya raised the question of Delta Omicron.
Combination.
What did you say? Co-infection, is it?
Yes, co-infection, yes.
Yeah. I think you're referring to the Cyprus report of what did they call Delta Cron, something like that.
Delta Cron, yes.
Yeah. That is, in my mind and others, feeling 99% laboratory contamination. It's not directly from patients. I think you'll have to wait and see whether there is, the PCR labs are notorious for cross-contaminating agents. So I think we'll have to wait and see. That doesn't worry me. Even the IHU, the French Institute of Hospital University, that is IHU, Institute of Hospital. That also doesn't worry me because the South Africans were very quick to point out the 2 things, the rapidity of spreading and the dodging of immunity. For both, Omicron is the record holder. Previously, it was Delta. So this is far more, people say 2 to 3 times faster spreading than Delta, and also dodging the immunity. However, I've seen studies that show that the vaccines were made with spike protein or killed virus or whatever from the Wuhan D614G variant. So that is the founder variant, if I call it. And vaccines, convalescent sera of many subjects taken from those who recovered from that variant has 1 order of magnitude lower. Okay, 1/10 neutralizing capacity to Delta. 100 to Omicron. What it means that if you can raise the antibody level 100 times, you will have equivalent neutralization capacity. So these are not immune escape mutants. These are still amenable to binding with neutralizing antibody and preventing infection. But the because of the affinity problem, less affinity with the new viruses, but antibodies have a breadth. They are not, they affinity will be lower and lower with other viruses, but maximal with the original, the immunogenic virus. So if you raise the antibody level, even the low affinity antibodies will latch on to some viruses. And so that is my simplistic explanation of why higher the antibody, better the neutralization, even for Omicron. But all over the world, they have found that where Omicron is prevalent, hospitalized patients are predominantly under-vaccinated or unvaccinated.
Yeah.
Fully vaccinated, far less. Boosted, very, very few. Okay, that tells you that there's a quantitative advantage of a booster dose. And even that, surprisingly, begins to wane. This is, unusual for a viral antibody. We expect virus antibodies to be more robust and longer lasting, but then this has, we have to understand that each virus is a law unto itself.
No, in addition, doesn't your T cell memory play a role, Dr. John? Because that does help us against subsequent variants as well, isn't it? We're talking a lot about neutralizing antibodies, but what about the T cell memory that we all have?
Memory is different from a T cell response. I mean, there is memory for both, but when you normally say memory, we talk about the antibody, the B cell memory. So there are memory in both sides. Now, beautiful study from UK that I very recently saw, that in the very early phase of the spread of, I think it was Delta virus. I already check whether it is Delta or their own, they had the Alpha virus emerging in UK. I already check. What they did was, this is done by, if I recall, like Lalwani, Ajit Lalwani's group. He's in Imperial College in London somewhere. They took a bunch of families with one index case and the rest of the family members. And they looked at the T cell immunity to the circulating endemic common cold coronaviruses. There are two of them that are beta coronaviruses. And what they found was fantastic. The families in which the family members did not get affected or infected versus family members who got infected, there was a distinct association with the common cold or that kind of coronaviruses, proving thereby that the cell-mediated immunity has a breadth that will cover just more than unless the neutralizing antibody, which is a little more focused on to high affinity. So what does cell-mediated immunity do? We teach that to prevent infection, you need antibody, and to reduce pathology, you need cell-mediated immunity. That is the kind of a simplistic division of labor between antibody and T cell immunity. But T cell immunity has a protective function in this and many other studies. Is that protective function after the first episode of infection, and cell-mediated immunity then throws it out so that you don't have any trace of infection? We don't know. But the bottom line is absolutely right. T-cell immunity has a role that we have not really understood or appreciated. We have understood but not appreciated. And so this also gives a perhaps a future vaccine director. And I think the company that made Covaxin did a very smart thing of using an adjuvant that directs Th1 response, the L-hydroxyquim. It was made by another Indian, Sunil David in Kansas. He, I think, is the patent holder of that. So cell-mediated immunity is something that we have understood or underestimated its value.
Right, and there's clearly many things we haven't figured out with this virus. But Dr. Ramasubramanian, do we know of the value of remdesivir in treating COVID infection? Because even now people are going into hospitals and they're getting remdesivir, and it was believed that there was not much use in most cases. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, after the first wave and even during the second wave, there was a lot of use of remdesivir, and we had gathered enough evidence to say that it did not make a huge difference. But in a certain population, probably those who developed a low oxygen level, what we call as hypoxia, within 7 days and a maximum of 10 days after onset of symptoms, if remdesivir was used at a dose of 200 milligrams on the first day and 100 milligrams for another 4 days, it probably improved outcomes. Now, this is not based on very strong evidence, but there was some indication that it did help in the early part of the illness because it affected the viral replication. In people who had low oxygen, they benefited. So this was a small subset who had early low oxygen presentation. It made a difference. But with the further studies have been looked into on the role of remdesivir, not in treating patients who may have low oxygen, but in preventing poor outcomes or worsening of their oxygen status. If you use them early, say between 3 to 7 days, if remdesivir is started in people who are stable, not requiring oxygen, but who had a higher possibility of running into complications, elderly people, people with comorbidities, immunosuppressed people. In these group of people, if you use only 3 days of remdesivir, 200 milligrams on day 1, 100 on day 2 and 3, it did help in preventing the progression of the disease. But most of this were in unvaccinated population. So in the current scenario, which is prevailing in India now, where most of the people are vaccinated, the role for remdesivir is low, but definitely it can be considered. We have found that it is reasonably safe in preventing progression in high-risk groups between day 3 and day 7. 3-day dose probably helps.
Right, that clarifies things a bit, yeah. Also now, we were talking about the TPR rising and, some sort of panic setting into the general population. I'd like to turn this to Dr. Saranya and ask you whether in your interactions with the virus in the lab, have you made more progress than the rest of us? Are there some readings, literally, that you would like to share with us, something that also differentiates this version, this variant from the other 2 waves that we've had in the past?
Okay, I would love to share it. We haven't yet started testing for the ST gene fallout as yet at the lab. We will be starting it probably next week. As of now, we're just screening for the virus. And the thing is, what we did find was that from the 28th of last month, our test positive rate just zoomed off. Like it had been remaining a steady 2 to 4% for the preceding 2 months almost. It hadn't changed despite the festival season that we saw. But suddenly from the 28th, actually, it just zoomed off. 7 became 10, 15, 20, and so on. And yesterday we were actually at 47% positive, test positive rate. Today, thankfully, it's come down to 40. I don't know whether that's a good sign, whether it's the harbinger of good news, I don't know. But the other interesting thing that we did find was that this year, as against last year, when we had just 5% of the pediatric age group, and if you extend it a bit to the under 18s, 5% alone were affected by the Delta, and even less so with the first wave that we saw in 2020. But this year already we've, between 25th of December to the 10th of January, we had in total screened about 19,558 people rather. And of them, we had a test positive rate. If you look at it totally over the spread out test positive rate, it was 27.2%. And of these, 11% belonged to the under 18 group. Which was because even when we had it in the preceding years, it was only over the 10-year-old age group that we actually saw positives. Whereas this year, we are seeing them even in the 1 to 10 age group. And we had 2 children under 1 year who tested positive, 2 children. So that is something that was interesting. And another thing that was also very worrisome, in fact, I think Dr. Ravi mentioned this in his, when he spoke, and that was that when we started again doing this calculation of the test positive rate, both weekly, 7-day percentage and daily, we found that initially when we started around the 21st of last month, there was a distinct difference between the district samples test positive rate and that in Chennai. But now they are on par. So which means it's already gone to the districts. And so now they're just running neck to neck. And like I said, yesterday we were 40.3 in Chennai and 39.8 with the other samples. So it has gone into the district. So I think looking at these things and going from past experience, I think probably in another 2 weeks or so, we are going to touch a peak in Chennai, or maybe maybe take it on the first week of February. That's what we saw, because in fact, it did cross about 53-54% before it actually started dropping down previous 2 years. So right, today was good. It was 40.3, but I don't know if that's going to stay. Let's hope it does. But that is something. And looking at the other states, because I did contact our labs in the other states too. And I think Karnataka has about 50% of its samples coming in as Omicron positive. Here we have said it's about 80 to 85% in Tamil Nadu. And in Kerala, their test positive rate is far lower than ours. I think Kerala has been, I think should be an independent study, because right through this COVID, I think Kerala has been behaving differently from every other state. I don't know whether it was the previous lessons they had learned from Zika and all of that, but I think they did very well in the first wave, second wave not so well, because that was where they were badly hit. And I think now they're at 14.2, but steadily increasing. Hyderabad is also at about 45%, and Mumbai is at about 40%. So I think all over it's around the same now. And I just think that maybe another 2 weeks to go. But having said all of this, both Ram and Dr. Jacob, I'm terribly disturbed about one thing. How long are we going to live in this state of suspended animation? Because for 2 years, I think the whole world has been in a state of putting things on hold. How long do you think before this, we can really carry on our new normal lives?
Yeah, Dr. Jacob.
Yeah, that is a question that no one can answer. But let me put it this way. You said the 28th of December.
Yeah.
There was magic at that time, because our Omicron wave started on the 29th of December.
Okay.
Perceptibly. Why am I saying this? Because for nearly 6 months, 25 weeks, which is half a year, or 24, 25 weeks, we were in the endemic phase. If you look at the graph, it was more or less flat. It was coming down below 40,000, below 30,000, below 20,000, below 10,000, if I recall right, about November 23 to December 28 or 27, below 10,000 per day, every day. 29, that crossed that level and went up. That's why I said 29 was magic. Where did Omicron come from? This morning's OIE's announcement says that they have no evidence. I mean, its proximate parent is not Delta, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, D614G. It is not, although it is B.1 lineage, it is B.1.1, distinctly different from the 0.1 series. With the other variants, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, have maybe one or two, I think one of them have 3 mutations on the RBD. Omicron have 15. You can't jump from 3 to 15. You have to go through 4, 5, 6, So it is quite a mystery as to what the origin of Omicron is. And this OI's statement caught my attention was that they have looked at many species of animals have got infected with the coronavirus. Cat family, dog family, hyena family, hippopotamus, white-tailed deer, that is the ruminant, a lot of mink and that family. And of course, rodents are also susceptible. The OIE has said that they are unable, they cannot at this time exclude the possibility that Omicron developed in rodents, not any of the large animals. Okay, so what I'm driving at is, in that case, it's an accident. It is not the normal evolution of the SARS coronavirus in humans developing pandemic. And we were going into endemic phase for 6 months. And if Omicron had not come, we would have continued in our endemic phase. And that would have been good news for everybody. And I had, after India became endemic, Taiwan became endemic. After Taiwan became endemic, Japan became endemic. After Japan became endemic, Israel became endemic. Israel had only 6 weeks. Japan had about 10 to 12 weeks. Taiwan had some 16 or 18 weeks. And then Omicron has hit all of them. So had Omicron not appeared, the world would have been in a totally different scenario with vaccinations and all that. We would have probably would have a normal socio-economic life pattern back to the pre-pandemic period. Omicron has thrown a monkey wrench into this. So we today cannot predict anything. My own guess is that if Omicron is an anomaly, possibly no further anomaly will show up. The frequency of anomalies are extremely rare. So therefore, with Omicron behind us, we will probably have a phase in which both Omicron and the endemic was all Delta. So Delta and Omicron may both co-circulate. That's why I said if a child gets Omicron first, lucky, because that will have protection against Delta. The other way around, the Delta risk is more. With vaccinations taken off, with so my guess is that if Omicron settles down, which will settle down very fast, the faster it goes up, the faster it will come down. So that is quite a bell-shaped or symmetrical curve. So at the end of Omicron, my expectation, but I will not say my prediction, my expectation is that Omicron and Delta will
Coexist.
Yes, they'll run together, sometimes Omicron more, sometimes Delta more. reminding me of the H3N2 and H1N1 pandemic. These are for the first time that two influenza A viruses are endemic. Previously, H1N1 till 1957, then H2N2 till 1968, then H3N2 till 2009. The new pandemic virus completely displaced the previous one for two reasons. One, it was faster spreading, and two, its immunity was sufficient to block the previous one. This happened repeatedly, as I said. But when it came to the pandemic 2009, swine flu genes also introduced into H1N1. It's not the old the 1918 H1N1. So it had to be called H1N1 pandemic 09. That rider in the name. It was fast spreading, but not faster than H3N2. So if it does not spread faster than H3N2, it cannot displace H3N2. It has got to be faster spreading and immunologically cross-reacting. Okay, so that is my mental picture of Delta and Omicron. They probably will be running together. And since Omicron protects against Delta, the immunity is quite strong, the reverse. But Delta's immunity towards Omicron is a little less strong. So do we have one vaccine or two vaccines? I do not know. Probably we will have to have one vaccine for all the previous variants and Omicron specific or bivalent vaccine or whatever. But we will design vaccines to fit the new scenario. And with all that, my hope is that we'll go back to the pre-pandemic endemicity once the Omicron wave is over. The other thing I want to mention is, you heard about vaccine hesitancy, which is a common word used. But is press listening to this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I will put it this way. I have a suspicion that there has been vaccine skepticism in the among the experts who were advising the government, because I heard voices saying that there is no need for booster dose when the entire rest of the world were clamoring for booster doses. So there is something that doesn't fit in our Indian expert thinking in terms of the vaccine rollout. So throughout December, November 27th or 26th, WHO announced it as a variant of concern with fast spreading and immune evasion. For one full month, we didn't push vaccination.
Yeah.
And even when ultimately vaccine decision was made, it was postponed for January first week or second week. So there's a little bit of skepticism about the whole vaccine that I felt the people advising the government were prone to, which is it's not a good news for India. I mean, all vaccines are not good. I know that, but facing you have to be clever enough to assess the vaccine's safety and efficacy so that vaccine manufacturers don't pull the wool over our eyes. Okay, it could happen. Anyway, so this is my hope, expectation, but not prediction that we will go back to the pre-Omicron state when Omicron wave is over.
Thank you, sir, for that. Also, if I may just a minute, Dr. Ramsubrahmanyam, before I come back to you, if I may just ask, since we're talking about the booster, two important things that have come up since they launched in January, is that one is mixing of doses. If you've taken Covaxin, then is it okay to take Covishield or vice versa? And the second thing is, again, as you mentioned earlier, how fast the rollout of vaccines itself will be. Because when we saw vaccine rollout last year, I think we lost a significant amount of time trying to cover the target group where there was vaccine hesitancy, which delayed the process for the rest of the population that was willing to be vaccinated. So in this case, for both these questions, I would like a response from you.
I muted Dr. Ramasubramaniam.
Ram, for you.
Sorry, I missed that. I thought it was for Dr. Jacob. Can you just briefly say that again?
You can, I mean,
Yes, I was just saying, when we were talking about boosters and vaccination and all that, Dr. Jacob John brought this hesitancy even among those, recommending to the government. So if this is the case and we have slowed down, and we also saw last year that the process of vaccination rollout was slow because we were trying to cover target groups that seemed to be unwilling or that were, hesitant to take the vaccine. Do we have to have a much faster pace of vaccinating the population this time? And also, for everyone who's joined now, what about mixing vaccines? If you've had Covishield and Covaxin, etc.
Now, regarding vaccines, I am an absolute advocate for vaccination, especially for adults. So I'm passionate about vaccinations, and I think no rate is fast enough to ensure that all of us are vaccinated. The main problem seems to be that because it is a proactive intervention, it is not a treatment. It is something you're doing to prevent a complication which may occur later. It's like a health insurance. It's like a vehicle insurance. Unless you make it mandatory, it is very difficult to ensure. And especially in India, there is such a lot of reluctance to vaccinate. I don't know why. And I'm not talking about the common man. I'm talking about doctors. If the doctors kept quiet, I think the public will take up vaccination. I'm saying it in an open forum, but this is based on over a decade of what I have seen trying to vaccinate adults. There is hesitancy thinking that vaccines have side effects. Vaccines will cause serious problems. But yes, everything does. You take ciprofloxacin, it causes severe allergy leading to death. So don't we use ciprofloxacin? Don't we use penicillin, even though we know that penicillins may kill some people due to anaphylaxis? So you always weigh the benefits versus the risk for the entire population. And I think vaccinations are a must, unless there are reasons of cost effectiveness or benefits of putting it in a programmatic manner. But that is different. But individually, when a vaccine is available, accessible, and it is safe, you still have people who are very reluctant to take, and I still don't know why. I am confessing here. So I'm all for getting it done at the earliest, 2 vaccines for everybody. With regard to the, Dr. Jacob, you want to say something?
No. Mixing vaccines, that's it.
Yeah. So I'll say my few, 2 pence, and then Dr. Jacob can give the vaccinology issues. As a clinician, we have had enough experience with vaccines to say that yes, probably changing the platform of the vaccine, changing the mechanism of the vaccine does boost it better. But having said that, for COVID, we don't have any evidence to say that both with Covishield and Covaxin, by mixing it between the two, there is any benefit. And again, as Dr. Ravi very correctly said, in a programmatic situation where the logistics have to play a huge role, asking vaccines to be mixed in a population who you don't know, probably go by what they see. And unfortunately, in a COVID pandemic, we have realized that giving too much knowledge to the public is unfortunately not the correct way to go about it. People come and tell me every day, doctor, please giving monoclonal antibodies. In fact, that day I had a patient who came to me having bought the monoclonal antibodies, a person who could access and afford it. I don't know how they got it. They came with the antibodies to me and say, give this to my patient. It is very tough, discussing with them because they have been bombarded with information that they have their own decisions. They have PhDs in COVID. So I think I don't approve of this. I don't think it's a good idea. And when press is listening, I think it's all the more important that there should be responsibility in reporting. And one argument is, no, there is knowledge available. Everybody should know. I think that is right. But then why do we need doctors? We have studied 30, 40 years and we still don't know what is the correct answer, and Dr. Jacob is smiling. Yes, we don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. Letting everybody take their own decision sometimes may not be the right way to go about it. There should be protocols, there should be policies which should be adhered to. So I agree with what the government has started doing right now. Giving the same vaccine as the homologous boosting dosing is what is recommended. I agree with that. Whether it is scientifically perfect or not is different, but practically, I think that is what is needed. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, I totally agree with that viewpoint. Science and program, I got to balance the two. The science behind booster is that in other countries, particularly in UK, that depended on the AstraZeneca for the first 2 doses. And when they got the Pfizer vaccine, the boosting effect was far superior to a 3rd dose of AstraZeneca. But AstraZeneca contains an extraneous component called the adenovirus. So we don't know whether that has something to do with it or not. However, as far as I'm concerned, all vaccines are the same. They are all spike protein vaccines. As long as it's all spike protein vaccines, particularly spike protein of the Wuhan D614G variant, all vaccines are, if you did not have the 2nd dose of one vaccine, you get the 2nd dose of another vaccine. So vaccinology wise, switching does not reduce the response. But when UK found this enhanced boosting effect when they switched, whether it is specific to those 2 vaccines, we do not know. However, in Hyderabad, there is an Institute of Gastroenterology, which did some experiment of 40 patients, Covishield, Covaxin, Covishield, or they did that, and it's not published, but I saw it in the newspapers, saying that they found more than 4-fold increase if we switched vaccine. Well, so ICMR is doing a study. CMC is heavily involved in that. The recruitment is not over. So we will know in due course whether switching is better than not switching. However, I think it's a minor issue. Booster is the issue. Please go ahead and boost, because unusual for viral immunity, this immunity seems to wane. By 6 months, the effect is quite remarkably low, and people get reinfection. So breakthrough infections and reinfection, breakthrough meaning previously immunized getting infection, reinfection meaning previously infected with one variant, you're getting a new variant. These are far too common with these coronaviruses than previous viruses that we have worked with. So booster must. Whichever vaccine is available, go ahead. Programmatically, Covaxin, Covishield makes simple sense.
Right. Thank you so much. That I think couldn't have been put more emphatically, that we need to vaccinate, yes, and we need to boost ourselves for sure. And I also think that the age of masks is not get over in the conceivable future. We'll have to go around following our COVID protocols, as our experts here today said. I think it's been a very fruitful 1.5 hour discussion that we've had today, and we've had people at the real cutting edge of COVID research and care and diagnostics with us today. Thank you so much. Heartfelt thanks for coming on today and for giving us this wonderful update on Omicron. So thank you, Dr. Jacob John. Thank you, Dr. Ram Subramaniam, and Dr. Sarni. Of course, this is your event, but thank you all the same.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.